My husband's sister moved into our guest room temporarily, and now she's redecorating our master bedroom because I'm obviously not taking care of her brother properly. When David's sister Veronica showed up at our door with 2 suitcases and tears streaming down her face, I opened our home without question. Her boyfriend had kicked her out after finding someone younger, she explained between sobs, and she just needed a place to crash for a few days until she could find her own apartment. David wrapped his arms around his little sister while I made up the guest bed, feeling guilty for the tiny voice in my head that whispered this was a mistake. Veronica had always been intense about health and wellness. She ran a successful nutrition consulting business and had abs that could cut glass, but she'd also lectured me about my coffee habits at every family gathering for the past 3 years. Still, she was family, and family helps family. I pushed down my reservations and told myself it was temporary, just a week or 2 at most. The first red flag appeared on day 3 when I found Veronica reorganizing our entire pantry at 6 in the morning. She'd thrown away half our food and replaced our coffee with something called mushroom elixir that tasted like dirt mixed with disappointment. When I protested, she held up a box of crackers like evidence in a murder trial. "Rebecca, these are basically poison," she said, reading the ingredient list with the same tone someone might use for a cancer diagnosis. "Partially hydrogenated oils, high fructose corn syrup, artificial preservatives. You're literally feeding David chemicals that are killing him from the inside out." I wanted to argue, but David walked into the kitchen at that moment, yawning and reaching for his usual breakfast. Veronica intercepted him with a green smoothie that looked like lawn clippings and smelled worse. To my amazement, he drank it without complaint, nodding along as she explained how the spirulina would boost his energy levels and improve his cognitive function. "Wow, I actually do feel more alert," he said after finishing the entire glass. Veronica beamed at him like he'd just told her she'd won the lottery. I poured myself regular coffee and tried not to feel like I was being slowly pushed out of my own kitchen. By the end of the first week, Veronica had established a routine that somehow revolved entirely around David's nutritional needs. She woke up at 5:30 to prepare his breakfast, packed his lunch with military precision, and had dinner waiting when he got home from work. I came home from my job at the marketing firm to find elaborate meals that looked like they belonged in a health magazine, complete with portion measurements and detailed explanations of the benefits of each ingredient. "David's been so tired lately," Veronica confided in me while plating what appeared to be grass with a side of seeds. "I can tell he's been stressed at work, and his body is crying out for proper nutrition. You know how men are about taking care of themselves." I watched my husband of 4 years dig into the meal with enthusiasm I'd never seen him show for my cooking. When I asked if he wanted me to start preparing healthier meals, Veronica jumped in before he could answer. "Oh, Rebecca, don't worry about it," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nutrition is literally my profession. Besides, you're so busy with work, and this gives me something productive to do while I'm job hunting." Except Veronica didn't seem to be job hunting. She was always home when I left for work and always home when I returned. Her laptop sat closed on the counter while she researched new recipes and ordered supplements online using David's credit card. When I mentioned this to David, he shrugged and said she was going through a rough time. "She's helping us eat healthier," he pointed out. "I've lost 7 pounds already, and I feel amazing. Cut her some slack, babe." 2 weeks turned into a month. Veronica's temporary stay became an indefinite arrangement that nobody discussed but everyone accepted. She'd taken over not just our meals, but our entire evening routine. While I tried to unwind from work, she'd corner David for long conversations about his stress levels, his sleep quality, and whether he was getting enough omega-3 fatty acids. I started noticing changes in David that went beyond weight loss. He seemed more energetic, but also more scattered, forgetting conversations we'd had and losing track of simple tasks. When I asked if he felt okay, he insisted he'd never felt better, but his eyes had a strange glassy quality that reminded me of someone coming off anesthesia. The morning I found Veronica measuring David's waist with a tape measure was the morning I decided enough was enough. They were standing in our bedroom, him shirtless, and her taking notes in a small journal, discussing his progress like he was a science experiment rather than a human being. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked from the doorway. Veronica didn't look embarrassed or apologetic. Instead, she turned to me with the patient expression of a teacher explaining something to a slow child. "I'm tracking David's transformation," she said. "He's lost 12 pounds now, and his muscle definition is really starting to show. Feel his arms, Rebecca. When's the last time you really paid attention to his body?" I stared at her in disbelief. "I pay attention to my husband's body just fine, thanks." "Do you, though?" Veronica's voice carried just enough concern to make it sound like genuine worry rather than an attack. "I mean, when's the last time you encouraged him to exercise? Or researched what foods would support his health goals? I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that sometimes we get comfortable in relationships and stop really seeing each other." David was nodding along like this made perfect sense. I felt like I'd walked into an alternate reality where my sister-in-law was giving me marriage advice while measuring my husband's body fat in our bedroom. I left for work that day with a knot in my stomach that tightened every time I thought about what I'd witnessed. That evening, I came home to find our living room rearranged. Veronica had moved our couch to accommodate a new piece of equipment that looked like a medieval torture device, but was apparently something called a reformer. She was guiding David through exercises while wearing athletic wear that showcased every muscle in her annoyingly perfect body. "This will really help with your posture," she was saying, adjusting his form with hands that lingered longer than necessary. "I can tell you've been hunching over your computer all day. Your shoulders are so tense." I watched her massage his neck and shoulders while he groaned with relief, and something dark and ugly twisted in my chest. It wasn't that I thought anything inappropriate was happening, exactly. It was more that I felt like a stranger observing intimate moments between two people who'd forgotten I existed. "How was work, honey?" David asked when he finally noticed me standing there. Fine, I said, though it wasn't. I'd spent the entire day distracted, making stupid mistakes and snapping at coworkers. How long is that thing staying in our living room? It's not that big, Veronica said before David could respond. And it's really helping David address some imbalances in his musculature. I noticed he favors his right side when he walks, probably from years of poor ergonomics and inadequate core strength. She spoke about my husband's body like she knew it better than I did. Like she'd been studying it, cataloging its flaws and deficiencies while I'd been obliviously going about my life. I felt stupid and angry and increasingly like an outsider in my own home. The final straw came when I walked into our bedroom to find Veronica hanging crystals from the ceiling fan. She'd also replaced our blackout curtains with something gauzy that let in too much light and moved our alarm clock to the other side of the room. What are you doing? I demanded. Creating a more restful environment for David, she said, not even pausing in her crystal arrangement. He's been having trouble with deep sleep, and the energy in here was all wrong. Too much electronics, too much clutter, too many synthetic materials disrupting his natural circadian rhythms. I looked around our bedroom, which had been fine for 4 years of marriage, and saw it through her critical eyes. Our furniture was cheaply made, our sheets were probably full of chemicals, and our general approach to interior design was apparently slowly killing my husband. You can't just redecorate our bedroom without asking, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm not redecorating, Veronica corrected. I'm optimizing. David asked me to help him create a better sleep environment. Didn't you, David? My husband, who was sitting on our bed testing out a new pillow that supposedly aligned his spine better, nodded absently. Yeah, I mentioned I'd been waking up tired. Veronica has some great ideas about how to improve our sleep quality. Our sleep quality, I repeated. This is our bedroom, David. Our space, not a wellness center. Veronica's expression softened into something that might have been pity. Rebecca, I know change can be hard, especially when you're used to doing things a certain way, but David's health has to be the priority here. He's been neglecting his body for years, and now he's finally taking steps to feel better. Shouldn't you be supporting that? The way she said it made me feel selfish for wanting to keep our synthetic fiber sheets and our digital alarm clock, like I was standing in the way of my husband's health and happiness simply by existing in my own space. That night, I lay awake on the new mattress Veronica had ordered, which was supposed to be made from organic latex and bamboo fibers, but felt like sleeping on a particularly firm piece of cardboard. David slept like the dead beside me, more deeply than I'd seen him sleep in months. I stared at the crystals casting weird shadows on the ceiling, and wondered when exactly I'd lost control of my own life. I decided to do some research. If Veronica was such an expert, surely she had credentials, client testimonials, some kind of professional reputation I could verify. What I found instead was a series of concerning patterns that made my blood run cold. Veronica's business had no real online presence beyond a basic Instagram account, with heavily filtered photos of smoothie bowls and inspirational quotes about wellness. Her supposed certification came from an online program that charged $300 for a PDF certificate that literally anyone could purchase. More disturbing were the scattered forum posts I found from people asking about problematic wellness coaches who'd inserted themselves into their clients' lives and relationships. One post in particular made my hands shake as I read it. A woman described how her sister had hired a nutrition coach who'd gradually taken over her household, isolated her from friends, and convinced her that everyone in her life was sabotaging her health journey. The coach had moved in temporarily and systematically destroyed the woman's marriage while positioning herself as the only person who truly cared about the client's well-being. I screenshotted everything and created a folder on my computer labeled Veronica Research. Then I started paying closer attention to what was actually happening in my house. I noticed that Veronica never ate the same meals she prepared for David. While he consumed elaborate concoctions full of exotic superfoods and supplements, she nibbled on simple salads and plain proteins. When I asked about this, she explained that everyone's nutritional needs were different, and she'd customized David's plan specifically for his body and goals. I started taking photos of David's meals and researching the ingredients. Some of the supplements Veronica was giving him weren't available in regular health food stores. They had to be ordered from specialty websites that made vague claims about enhancing mental clarity and reducing anxiety. When I looked closer at the ingredient lists, several contained compounds I'd never heard of. The breaking point came when I found Veronica in our bedroom at midnight, sitting beside David's sleeping form and taking notes in her journal. She had a small flashlight and was observing him like a scientist studying a lab rat. When she noticed me in the doorway, she didn't look guilty or embarrassed. His REM cycles have been much more regular since I adjusted his evening routine, she whispered. I wanted to document the improvement for his file. His file? I whispered back. I keep detailed records for all my clients, she said, as if this were perfectly normal. Sleep patterns, mood changes, physical responses to different interventions. How else would I track his progress? I backed out of the room and stood in the hallway, heart pounding. My husband wasn't Veronica's client. He was her brother, who was letting his sister crash in our guest room. But somehow, without anyone explicitly agreeing to it, he'd become her full-time wellness project, and I'd become an obstacle to his transformation. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went through David's bathroom cabinet while he was in the shower. Hidden behind his normal toiletries, I found an arsenal of supplements I'd never seen before. Powders and pills and tinctures with names like Cognitive Enhancement Blend and Emotional Balance Support. Many were from companies I couldn't find online, with labels that looked professionally printed but somehow off, like knockoff versions of legitimate products. I photographed everything and then did something that felt like a violation but also felt necessary. I went through Veronica's purse while she was outside doing yoga on our patio. Inside, I found a prescription bottle with David's name on it, filled with white pills I didn't recognize. The prescribing doctor was someone I'd never heard of, and the medication name was just a series of letters and numbers. My hands were shaking as I took photos of the prescription bottle and looked up the medication online. What I found made my stomach drop. It was an anti-anxiety medication that wasn't approved for use in the United States, with side effects that included dependency, memory issues, and increased susceptibility to suggestion. I sat on our guest room bed, surrounded by evidence that my sister-in-law was systematically drugging my husband, and tried to figure out what to do next. Calling the police felt extreme, but confronting Veronica directly felt dangerous. She'd positioned herself so carefully as David's savior, and my inadequacy, that he'd probably side with her over me. Instead, I decided to gather more evidence. I set up a small camera in our kitchen, hidden behind a cookbook, and started recording Veronica's meal preparations. I also began taking small samples of David's food and supplements, storing them in labeled containers in my office desk drawer. What I captured on camera over the next 3 days was chilling. Veronica added unmarked powders and liquids to David's meals, carefully measuring doses and checking her journal for reference. She also prepared separate portions of the same meals without the additives, which she stored in the refrigerator marked with a small V that I'd assumed stood for Veronica, but now realized probably stood for something else entirely. I watched her crush pills and stir them into David's morning smoothies, all while maintaining the caring, concerned expression of someone nursing a loved one back to health. She even talked to herself as she worked, commenting on his progress and adjusting dosages based on his responses to previous treatments. "A little more of the blue powder today," she murmured while preparing his breakfast. "He was too alert yesterday evening. Need to find the right balance between compliance and consciousness." I nearly vomited hearing those words. My husband wasn't being helped. He was being systematically drugged and controlled by someone who'd convinced him she was saving his life. During this time, I also noticed Veronica had begun making changes to other parts of our house that she claimed were for David's benefit. She replaced our regular light bulbs with expensive full-spectrum ones that supposedly supported natural circadian rhythms. She installed air purifiers in every room, claiming our home's air quality was toxic. Most disturbingly, she'd begun rearranging our furniture according to what she called energetic flow principles. When I questioned these changes, David defended them enthusiastically. "I can actually feel the difference," he insisted. "The air feels cleaner, and the lighting doesn't strain my eyes like it used to. You know how I used to get headaches in the evenings? They're completely gone now." I wanted to point out that his evening headaches had started around the same time Veronica moved in, but something in his glassy-eyed expression stopped me. It was like talking to someone who was there but not entirely present, going through the motions of normal conversation while something else entirely was happening behind his eyes. Veronica had also begun scheduling David's entire day around what she called his optimal energy cycles. She woke him at specific times, fed him at precise intervals, and even dictated when he should shower, exercise, and go to bed. She presented this as scientific optimization, but I recognized it as complete control over his daily routine. "Traditional schedules are based on industrial convenience, not biological needs," she explained when I questioned why David was suddenly eating dinner at 5:30 instead of 7. "David's cortisol levels are naturally higher in the late afternoon, so earlier meals support better digestion and sleep quality." David nodded along with everything she said, but I noticed he'd stopped making plans with friends, or even suggesting we do things together on weekends. When I asked about this, he said he was focusing on his health transformation and didn't want to derail his progress with social obligations. That phrase chilled me. David had never called spending time with our friends social obligations. He'd always been outgoing and social, but now he seemed content to spend all his free time discussing wellness strategies with Veronica or following the exercise routines she'd designed for him. I started documenting these behavioral changes alongside the physical evidence I was collecting. I kept a journal of David's personality shifts, his increasing isolation from friends and family, and his growing dependence on Veronica's guidance for basic daily decisions. The most disturbing development came when I discovered Veronica had been reading David's text messages and emails. I found her going through his phone while he was in the shower, taking photos of conversations with his coworkers and friends. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. "I'm helping him identify negative influences in his life," she said calmly. "Toxic relationships create stress, which manifests as physical illness. David needs to surround himself with people who support his wellness journey." "You mean people who support you controlling his life?" I shot back. "Rebecca, I understand you're feeling threatened by the positive changes in David," Veronica replied with maddening patience. "But your resistance is actually proving my point. A truly supportive partner would celebrate his transformation, not try to sabotage it." That afternoon, I called David's doctor and explained that I was concerned about his recent personality changes and wanted to rule out any medical causes. Dr. Gilman agreed to see him the next day. But when I told David about the appointment, Veronica immediately objected. "Traditional medicine isn't going to understand what we're doing," she told David while I stood right there. "Mainstream doctors are trained to treat symptoms with pharmaceuticals, not address root causes through nutrition and lifestyle changes. You'll just end up with a prescription for antidepressants or sleeping pills." David nodded like this made perfect sense. "Maybe I should wait a few more weeks, see how I feel with the new protocol." "What new protocol?" I asked. Veronica and David exchanged a look that made me feel like an outsider intruding on a private conversation. "I've been working with a naturopathic doctor in California," Veronica explained. "He specializes in men's health and hormonal balance. We're trying some cutting-edge approaches that aren't available through conventional medicine." I wanted to scream that none of this was real, that she was making it all up, but I could see in David's eyes that he believed every word. More than that, he trusted her completely. She'd become his guru, his guide to a better version of himself, and I was just the nagging wife who didn't understand wellness. That week, things escalated in ways I never could have anticipated. Veronica began making comments about our marriage that were thinly veiled attempts to drive a wedge between David and me. She suggested that my negative energy was interfering with his healing process, that my skepticism about his transformation revealed deeper issues with our relationship. Couples often struggle when one partner commits to growth while the other stays stuck in old patterns. She told David during one of their evening wellness consultations that I wasn't invited to join. It's natural for Rebecca to feel left behind, but she has to decide whether she wants to evolve with you or hold you back. I overheard this conversation from the hallway and felt something snap inside me. Veronica wasn't just drugging my husband and controlling his daily routine. She was actively working to destroy our marriage while positioning herself as his only true ally. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I was going to confront David with everything I'd discovered, regardless of whether he was ready to hear it or not. But when I went to wake him up, I found his side of the bed empty. A note on his pillow said he'd gone for an early morning hike with Veronica to reset his energy before starting the day. I used their absence to thoroughly search Veronica's room for the first time. What I found there made my blood freeze. She had detailed files on both David and me, including psychological profiles, behavioral analysis, and what appeared to be a long-term strategy for isolating David from everyone in his life except her. In her journal, she'd written extensively about her plans to convince David that I was toxic for his health, that our marriage was holding him back from reaching his full potential. She'd documented my reactions to her interventions, noting which tactics made me more likely to argue with David and create conflict in our relationship. Most chilling were her notes about something she called Phase 3. According to her journal, Phase 3 involved convincing David to leave me entirely and relocate to a wellness retreat center she'd been researching in Costa Rica. She'd already been in contact with the retreat, discussing long-term residency options for a client who needed complete lifestyle transformation. I photographed everything with shaking hands, finally understanding the full scope of what Veronica was attempting. This wasn't just about control or manipulation. She was systematically planning to steal my husband's entire life, using wellness and health as weapons to destroy everything we'd built together. When they returned from their hike, both David and Veronica were glowing with endorphins and enthusiasm. David couldn't stop talking about how amazing he felt after breathing fresh air and connecting with nature. Veronica listened with the satisfied expression of someone whose experiment was proceeding exactly as planned. That night, I pretended to go to bed early but actually snuck out of the house and drove to the police station. I brought all my evidence: the photos of the medications, the video footage of Veronica drugging David's food, the research I'd done on her fake credentials and questionable supplements, and the journal entries detailing her plan to isolate David completely. Detective Angela Foster listened to my story with growing concern, taking notes and asking detailed questions about the timeline of events. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "This is definitely suspicious," she said, "but it's going to be complicated to prosecute. Your husband is an adult who's allowing his sister to live in your home and prepare his meals. Unless we can prove she's giving him controlled substances without his knowledge, it might be difficult to make criminal charges stick." "What about the prescription medication I found?" I asked. "That's our best lead," Detective Foster agreed. "If she's obtaining prescription drugs illegally and administering them without consent, that's multiple felonies. But we'll need to get the medications tested to confirm what they actually contain, and we'll need your husband's cooperation for a blood test." I left the police station with instructions to document everything and a plan to have David's supplements tested by a lab. Detective Foster also gave me the number for a domestic abuse counselor who specialized in cases involving coercive control, which was apparently the technical term for what Veronica was doing to my husband. The counselor, Diana Lopez, explained over the phone that coercive control often looked like care and concern to outsiders. Abusers isolated their victims gradually, convinced them that they were the only person who truly understood their needs, and created dependency through various means, including psychological manipulation and sometimes chemical dependency. The fact that she's using wellness and health as the vehicle for control is actually very common, Diana explained. It allows the abuser to position themselves as the caregiver while undermining the victim's ability to think clearly or make independent decisions. Your husband probably genuinely feels better in some ways, which makes it harder for him to recognize what's happening. Diana helped me understand that David's compliance wasn't weakness or stupidity. His judgment had been systematically compromised through a combination of chemical influence and psychological manipulation. The supplements Veronica was giving him likely contained compounds designed to increase suggestibility, while the wellness framework provided a rational explanation for all the changes in his behavior and thinking. "The key is going to be getting him away from her influence long enough for the chemicals to clear his system," Diana explained. "Once he can think clearly again, he'll be much more likely to see the situation for what it really is." I scheduled a session with Diana for the following week, but events overtook my careful planning. That Friday evening, I came home from work to find David unconscious on our living room floor, with Veronica kneeling beside him, calling 911. "He just collapsed," she told the paramedics through tears. "He said he felt dizzy, and then he just went down. I don't understand what happened." But something about her performance felt off. Her tears seemed calculated, and she kept glancing at me as if gauging my reaction. When the paramedics asked about medications, she rattled off a list of supplements but conveniently forgot to mention the prescription drugs I'd found in her purse. At the hospital, blood tests revealed dangerous levels of several drugs in David's system, including the anti-anxiety medication I'd found, and 2 other compounds that the doctors couldn't immediately identify. His liver enzymes were elevated, suggesting possible damage from prolonged exposure to toxic substances. While David was still unconscious, I showed Detective Foster's card to the attending physician and explained what I'd discovered about Veronica. The doctor immediately ordered more comprehensive testing and put David's room under security observation. Dr. Patricia Whitman, the emergency room physician, was particularly concerned about the combination of drugs in David's system. These compounds shouldn't be taken together, she explained. The interaction between them could have caused his collapse, and continued exposure could lead to permanent neurological damage. When David finally woke up 12 hours later, he was confused and disoriented, but gradually became more alert as the drugs worked their way out of his system. For the first time in months, I could see glimpses of the man I'd married returning to his eyes. "What happened to me?" he asked, his voice weak but clearer than it had been in weeks. "You were poisoned," I told him, taking his hand. "Veronica has been putting drugs in your food." David's initial reaction was disbelief, then anger at me for making such accusations. But as the medical staff explained what they'd found in his blood work, and as his mind cleared further, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place for him. "I remember feeling strange," he said slowly, "like I was watching myself from outside my body sometimes, and I kept forgetting things, important things. I thought it was just stress from work." Detective Foster arrived that afternoon with a warrant to search our house and arrest Veronica on charges of poisoning, practicing medicine without a license, and assault. They found enough evidence to fill several boxes. Unmarked bottles of compounds ordered from overseas suppliers, detailed journals documenting David's responses to various drugs, and a laptop full of research on psychological manipulation and chemical dependency. Veronica had been conducting a long-term experiment on my husband, using him as a test subject for theories about controlling behavior through nutrition and supplementation. Her computer contained dozens of research papers on topics like enhancing compliance through targeted supplementation and the role of nutrition in behavioral modification. The most disturbing discovery was a series of emails between Veronica and someone calling himself Dr. Marcus Sterling, who claimed to be researching methods for optimizing human compliance through targeted interventions. The emails detailed plans for gradually increasing David's dependency while isolating him from other relationships, with the ultimate goal of complete psychological and chemical control. Dr. Sterling turned out to be Veronica's former boyfriend, a man named Richard Dalton, who had a history of involvement in various pseudoscientific wellness schemes. Together, they'd developed what they called Project Renaissance, a systematic approach to psychological and chemical control disguised as health optimization. David was not their first victim. Police investigation revealed that Veronica had previously targeted 2 other men through her wellness coaching business, both of whom had ended up financially devastated and emotionally destroyed after months of her treatment. One had nearly died from liver damage caused by the toxic compounds she'd been feeding him. When confronted with the evidence, Veronica initially denied everything, claiming she'd only been trying to help David achieve optimal health. But faced with the chemical analysis of David's blood and the contents of her computer, she eventually admitted to supplementing his nutrition with compounds designed to reduce anxiety and increase trust. She'd been planning to gradually convince David to leave me and start a new life focused entirely on wellness, with her as his guide and caretaker. The fake naturopathic doctor was actually her former boyfriend who'd helped her develop the drugging protocol as part of some twisted relationship experiment that they hoped to turn into a profitable business model. "We were developing a new paradigm for wellness coaching," she told the police during her interrogation, apparently still believing her actions were justified. "Traditional therapy takes years and often fails. We found ways to accelerate the process of personal transformation." The reality was that they'd found ways to chemically enslave people while convincing them it was for their own good. David spent 3 more days in the hospital while his body eliminated the accumulated toxins. As his thinking cleared, he began to remember things differently. The past 2 months felt like a fog lifting, revealing the manipulation he'd been too chemically impaired to recognize. "I can't believe I let this happen," he kept saying. "I should have seen what she was doing." "You couldn't see it," I assured him. "That was the whole point." Dr. Whitman explained that the compounds in David's system had been specifically chosen to impair critical thinking while maintaining basic functioning. "It's actually quite sophisticated," she said. "Whoever designed this protocol knew exactly how to keep someone compliant without making them obviously incapacitated." The physical recovery was challenging enough, but the psychological healing proved even more difficult. David struggled with shame and self-doubt, unable to trust his own judgment after months of having his perceptions manipulated. He'd lost weight and muscle tone, despite Veronica's claims about optimizing his health, and suffered from anxiety and depression as his brain chemistry slowly returned to normal. We started couples therapy with Diana Lopez, who helped both of us understand the dynamics of what had happened. David wasn't weak or gullible for falling victim to Veronica's manipulation. She'd used sophisticated psychological and chemical techniques developed specifically to bypass normal defensive mechanisms. "Coercive control works by gradually eroding the victim's ability to think independently," Diana explained. "It's not about intelligence or strength. It's about finding someone's vulnerabilities and exploiting them systematically." For David, those vulnerabilities included his love for his sister, his desire to be healthier, and his trust in family. Veronica had weaponized all of these positive traits against him. The legal process moved slowly but steadily. Veronica pled guilty to aggravated assault and practicing medicine without a license. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay for David's medical expenses and our counseling costs. Richard Dalton, the fake doctor, was arrested in Colorado and charged with conspiracy and distribution of controlled substances. The investigation also uncovered their broader plans. They'd been developing what they called a wellness retreat in Costa Rica that would have been nothing more than a prison where wealthy clients paid enormous sums to be psychologically and chemically controlled under the guise of transformation therapy. 6 months later, David's health returned to normal, though he still struggles with trusting his own judgment about people. We're in couples therapy working through the trauma of those months, learning to recognize manipulation and rebuild the trust that Veronica systematically destroyed. The physical damage healed relatively quickly, but the psychological scars run deeper. David still has nightmares about feeling trapped in his own body, watching himself make decisions that didn't feel like his own. He's hypervigilant about what he eats and drinks, checking ingredient lists obsessively, and refusing anything that comes from unfamiliar sources. Our house feels like ours again, free from the toxic presence that nearly destroyed our marriage. We've redecorated completely, removing every trace of Veronica's optimizations. David throws away any supplement that comes in an unmarked container, and we both cook dinner together most nights, appreciating the simple pleasure of knowing exactly what we're eating. The guest room stays empty now, and we're perfectly fine with that.